Have you ever watched a mother look her own daughter in the eye, in front of 300 people, and tell her to sit in the back and keep her mouth shut so she doesn't embarrass the family? Because that happened to me. And what my mother didn't know was that a dead woman had already decided how that night was going to end. Here's what the moment looked like. A ballroom full of chandeliers and champagne. My younger sister on a stage being handed everything, the house, the company, the future, all of it. My father at the microphone calling her name like she was the only daughter he'd ever had. And me, Vivian Thornton, 42 years old, sitting at a table next to the kitchen door in a clearance rack dress, watching my own family throw me away like yesterday's newspaper. Then a man I had never seen before walked up to my table, set down a cream-colored envelope, and said 6 words that changed everything. Your grandmother knew this would happen. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back 6 years, before the envelope, before the boardroom, before any of it. Back to a time when I was just a tired, aching woman trying to survive inside a family that had already decided I didn't matter. The Thorntons were old money Philadelphia. Not the flashy kind, the quiet kind. The kind whose name shows up on hospital wings and university lecture halls and brass plaques inside buildings most people never enter. My father, Frank Thornton, ran Thornton Capital Holdings, a commercial real estate empire my grandmother Lucille had built from a single office in South Philly back in 1968. By 2024, the company was valued at somewhere north of $85 million. Lucille Thornton was a legend. Daughter of a seamstress and a postal worker. She bought her first property at 26 with money she'd saved working double shifts, law office by day, waiting tables by night. By the time she was 50, she owned half a city block. By 60, she had a seat on 3 corporate boards. She built Thornton Capital from the ground up, brick by brick, deal by deal, handshake by handshake, and she ran it with an iron spine and a conscience. Everything she touched turned into something real, something lasting. Which is more than I can say for the man who inherited it. My father didn't build a single thing. He inherited the company when Grandma Lucille started stepping back in her 70s, and he wore that inheritance like he'd earned it himself. Strutted through boardrooms like he'd laid every brick personally. My mother, Diane, was cut from the same cloth, only her currency was appearances. She came from a good Connecticut family, married well, and spent the next 3 decades making absolutely sure the world saw exactly the version of the Thorntons she wanted them to see. Perfect house. Perfect parties. Perfect daughter. Daughter, singular. Because according to my parents, they only had one daughter worth mentioning. That was Colleen. Colleen was 3 years younger than me, and from the day she was born, she was the sun the whole family orbited around. I don't say that with bitterness. I say it with the exhaustion of a woman who spent her entire adult life standing in the shadow and being told the shade was all she deserved. When I was 9 years old, I was diagnosed with fibromyalgia. If you're not familiar with it, it's a chronic condition that causes widespread pain, deep fatigue, and brain fog, the kind of bone tired that sleep doesn't fix. Some days I could barely get out of bed. Some days I pushed through and paid for it for a week afterward. There's no cure, you just learn to manage it. But my parents didn't see a daughter managing a devastating condition. They saw a daughter who was lazy. That word, lazy, followed me through every single room of that house for over 3 decades. Why can't Vivian keep up? Because she's lazy. Why doesn't she finish what she starts? She doesn't try. Why isn't Vivian more like Colleen? Because Colleen actually wants to succeed. Here's something I need you to understand. Fibromyalgia is invisible. You can't see it on an X-ray. You can't point to it on a chart. And because you can't see it, people decide it's not real. My own parents decided it wasn't real. My mother once told a room full of relatives that I had a flair for the dramatic. My father, at Thanksgiving dinner with 18 people listening, said that if I spent half as much energy on my career as I did on my symptoms, I might actually amount to something. I was 34 years old. I excused myself, went to the bathroom, and sat on the tile floor until the shaking stopped. Not a single person came to check on me. But there was one person who never doubted me. Not once. Every Sunday, rain or shine, flare up or not, I'd drive out to Grandma Lucille's brownstone in Chestnut Hill. She'd make tea, strong and black, and we'd sit in her kitchen surrounded by framed photographs of every building she'd ever owned. She never once called me lazy. She never once looked at me with that flicker of disappointment I'd gotten used to seeing in every other face in the family. What she said, one afternoon when I was crying at her kitchen table because my body had failed me again and I felt like the whole world was built for people who didn't hurt the way I did, was this. She put her hand over mine and said, "Vivi, you carry more weight than anyone in this family, and you do it without making a sound. That's not weakness, sweetheart. That's the kind of strength most people will never understand." I didn't know yet how much those words would come to matter. But Grandma Lucille was planting seeds. She was always planting seeds. Here's how the Thornton family worked. Colleen got everything. I got whatever scraps were left. And before you think I'm exaggerating, let me lay it out. When Colleen was 16, my parents hired a private SAT tutor from Princeton. $400 an hour, 3 times a week, for a full year. When I asked for help paying for a pain management specialist, my mother sighed and said, "Vivian, we can't keep throwing money at something that doesn't have a solution." Colleen went to Penn for undergrad, then Columbia for law school. Full family support every step of the way. Apartment in Manhattan, paid for. Car, paid for. Every internship, every networking dinner, every advantage money could buy, handed to her on a silver tray. When I graduated from Temple University, a perfectly good school, pushing through a degree while managing a condition that some days made it impossible to hold a pen, my father's only comment was, "Well, at least you finished." Christmas 2018. 22 relatives gathered around the dining table at my parents' Rittenhouse Square townhouse. You know the kind of dinner. Crystal, china, a catered spread that cost more than my monthly rent. My father stood at the head of the table with his wine glass raised and announced that Colleen had made partner track at one of the top law firms in the city. "Record time," he said. The room exploded. Cheers, applause, hugs all around. Then his gaze drifted down the table to me, and the warmth in his voice just vanished, like someone had flipped a switch. "And Vivian," he said, and there was this little theatrical pause. "Well, Vivian is also here." A few people laughed. Soft, embarrassed laughs. Colleen didn't say a word in my defense. She just smiled and accepted another toast. I stared at my plate until the roast lamb blurred through the tears I refused to let fall. But under the table, a thin papery hand found mine and squeezed so tight it almost hurt. Grandma Lucille. When I looked up, her eyes were burning. Not sad. Furious. She didn't say anything then, but 3 months later she called me to her house and handed me a small wooden box, dark mahogany with brass hinges. "Keep this safe, Vivi. Don't open it yet. When you need it, you'll know." I took it home and tucked it in my closet. What I didn't know was that Christmas dinner had lit a fuse. And my grandmother spent the rest of her life making sure it would go off at exactly the right moment. After I graduated, I applied for a job at Thornton Capital. I thought if I could just get my foot in the door, maybe things would change. My father hired me as an office coordinator. $44,000 a year. That same month, Colleen joined as chief legal counsel at $270,000 plus bonuses. My job was answering phones, booking conference rooms, and making sure the printer had toner. I wasn't invited to a single meeting. Never shown a single contract. I was invisible. But here's the thing about being invisible, you hear everything. Through thin office walls I heard executives discussing deals, partnerships, negotiations. And I started doing what I'd always done, seeing patterns. I'd sketch out the relationships between parties, trace the money, spot conflicts nobody else noticed. My brain worked differently because it had to. Years of compensating had turned into a genuine skill. Grandma Lucille knew this about me. During our Sunday visits she'd spread out old contracts on her kitchen table and walk me through them, not word by word, but as systems. "Your father reads contracts like a lawyer," she told me once. He looks for what he can exploit. You read them like an engineer. You see how all the pieces connect. She was right about that. She was right about a lot of things. April 2024. The email showed up on a Tuesday afternoon. Subject line, position restructuring, confidential. They were eliminating my role. Effective July 1st. 5 years of making myself small, useful, and quiet, and they were tossing me out. That night I stayed late, organizing files nobody would ever look at. And through the thin walls separating my cubicle from my father's corner office, I heard voices. Frank and Diane. We can't have her here when Colleen takes over, my father was saying. It looks bad. The CEO's sister working as a receptionist. People will ask questions. What kind of questions? My mother said. Why she's not in leadership. Why she's never been promoted. A silence that stretched like a blade. Then my father's voice, flat and final, why she is the way she is. My mother's response came soft, almost gentle, which somehow made it 10 times worse. We've done everything we could for her, Frank. Some people just don't have what it takes. $44,000 a year. My apartment in Fishtown split with a roommate cost $1,600 a month. No savings, no safety net. If this job vanished, I'd be underwater within weeks. But it wasn't the money that crushed me. It was the understanding, cold and absolute, settling into my bones like frost. If I accepted their version of who I was, if I let them write the ending, I would spend the rest of my life as the family disappointment. Not because I had actually failed at anything, but because I had never once been given the chance to succeed. May 11th, 2024. The Bellevue Hotel. Grand Ballroom. 320 guests, crystal chandeliers, a 12-piece ensemble playing Cole Porter in the corner. This was Frank Thornton's stage, his kingdom, the place where he performed his role as patriarch and power broker. I stood in the entrance wearing a black dress I'd found on clearance for $60. Everyone else glittered in designer gowns and custom suits. My mother intercepted me before I could find a seat. Her eyes traveled from my drugstore lipstick to my scuffed shoes, and her mouth went into a thin line. Vivian. You couldn't find anything nicer? This is what I have, Mom. She touched her pearl necklace like she needed to hold something expensive just to recover from looking at me. You're at table 31. Near the back. Try not to draw attention to yourself. Then she leaned in, close enough for me to smell her perfume, and said, Tonight is Colleen's night. Whatever resentment you think you're entitled to, keep it to yourself. Don't embarrass us. She walked away before I could answer. Table 31 was behind a pillar, near the service corridor. From there I watched my father take the stage and announce that Colleen would inherit everything. The family residence on Delancey Street, valued at $11 million. And the position of CEO when he retired. Standing ovation. Camera flashes. Colleen dabbed her eyes with practiced grace. 320 people celebrating, and not a single one of them glanced at table 31. Then, near the entrance, the silver-haired man in the gray suit started walking toward me. Slowly. Deliberately. Like he'd been waiting for exactly this moment. He stopped at my table. Up close, he was older than I'd thought. Early 60s. Deep-set eyes. The careful posture of someone who'd spent a lifetime in courtrooms. Miss Thornton. That's me. My name is David Calloway. He placed a business card on the table. Cream-colored, embossed. Harris, Calloway and Byrne, attorneys at law. I was your grandmother's personal attorney. My chest tightened. My grandmother passed away 3 years ago. I'm aware. She left something for you, with very specific instructions about when to deliver it. He reached inside his jacket and produced a cream envelope. Heavy stock. Red wax seal. Notary stamp. This is her will. The real one. The one your father doesn't know exists. The notary seal read September 2019. 5 months after she gave me the wooden box. Your grandmother told me to tell you this, word for word. Give this to Vivi on the day Frank shows her who he is. By then, she'll be ready. He straightened his tie. You have my card. Then he disappeared into the crowd. I couldn't breathe in that ballroom. I pushed through the service entrance and found an empty hallway near the kitchen. Fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. The celebration muffled behind closed doors. My fingers shook as I broke the wax seal. 3 pages. Dense legal text. Notarized signature. September 15, 2019. I, Lucille Margaret Thornton, being of sound mind and body, do hereby revoke all previous testamentary documents and declare this to be my last will and testament. Near the middle, my eyes caught on a paragraph that made the room tilt. To my granddaughter, Vivian Marie Thornton, I bequeath 51% of my shares in Thornton Capital Holdings, LLC, currently valued at approximately $43 million, along with all voting rights associated therewith. I read it again. And again. 51%. Controlling interest. The will continued. This bequest is made with full knowledge of my son Frank's treatment of Vivian. She has been excluded, diminished, and denied opportunity, not due to lack of ability, but due to lack of support. Vivian is not lazy. Vivian was abandoned. And I will not allow her father's cruelty to define her life after my death. I pressed my back against the cold wall and let the tears come. She'd seen everything. Every dismissal, every dinner, every time they looked right through me like I was made of glass. Every time they laughed at my expense and I just sat there and took it. She saw it all. And she didn't just watch. She planned. There was one condition. To activate the bequest, I had to formally request an emergency board meeting within 72 hours of receiving the document. Miss the window, and the will becomes void. David Calloway was waiting by the coat check when I emerged. The deadline isn't a punishment, he said. It's permission. Permission to stop waiting for your family to change their minds and to take what's yours. I looked back through the ballroom doors. Applause. Toasts. My father's voice on the microphone. I'll call you in the morning, I said. We're requesting that meeting. He allowed himself a small smile. She told me you'd say that. That night, I opened the wooden box. A handwritten letter on Lucille's stationery, a faded document with a 1968 date stamp, and a USB drive. The letter read, My dearest Vivi, the enclosed document is the original partnership agreement from when I founded Thornton Capital. Your father has never seen it. Founders' shares carry permanent voting rights that cannot be diluted without board approval. The USB contains something else. In 2018, your father proposed reducing my voting rights from 51% to 10%. He told the board I was too old to understand modern business. The board rejected it by 2 votes. Mine and Margaret Linden's. I never forgot what he tried to do. And I never forgave him for the way he treated you to justify it. The letter ended, use this wisely, Vivi. Not for revenge. For justice. All my love, Grandma Lucille. Now, before I tell you what happened in that boardroom, I need to say something. Because if you've been listening to this story and feeling a knot tightening in your gut, if something about the way my family treated me feels painfully familiar, there is a reason. What my parents did to me wasn't random cruelty. It was a pattern. And it works like this: in some families, one child gets chosen to carry all the praise, and another child gets chosen to carry all the blame. The golden one can do no wrong. The other one can do no right. And it doesn't matter what either of them actually does, because the roles were assigned before anyone had a chance to prove who they really were. My father needed someone to look down on so he could feel powerful. My mother needed someone to fix so she could feel needed. And Colleen, she didn't choose her role any more than I chose mine, but she never once fought it. The worst part is this: after you hear it long enough, you start to believe it. You start thinking maybe they're right. Maybe you are lazy, or too sensitive, or just not enough. That's not truth talking. That's a lie you've been hearing so long it started to sound normal. And if that hits close to home, I want you to hear this clearly. It was never about what's wrong with you. It was always about what was wrong with them. Now, this is what I do on this channel. I collect real stories from people who've lived through things like this, from Reddit, Quora, from forums where folks share what they've survived. I change names and details to protect their privacy, add a bit of fiction where needed, and then break down the psychology behind it so we can all understand what actually happened and why. Because once you see the pattern clearly, nobody can run that same trick on you ever again. If that sounds like something you need, hit subscribe right now. It costs nothing. And I promise you, the stories on this channel will make you feel less alone. Now, let me tell you what happened when I walked into that boardroom, because we are just getting started. May 12th. 9 in the morning. Margaret Linden answered on the second ring. Vivian Thornton. Her voice had the rasp of a woman who'd lived hard and laughed harder. I've been wondering when you'd call. You know who I am? Sweetheart, your grandmother and I built half of South Philly together in the 70s. She talked about you all the time. She also told me about the will 3 years ago, right before she passed. Then you know what I'm about to do. I know what you're considering doing. There's a difference. Her tone shifted. You want to call an emergency board meeting? That requires 3 directors to sign the petition. I'm one. You'll need 2 more. Can you help me find them? I can do better than that. Your father is not as beloved as he thinks he is. His management style is a dictatorship. At least 4 board members have raised concerns behind closed doors. Alan Rivera and Susan Hale have both been on the wrong end of Frank's temper. I'll make some calls. She paused. Vivian, I need you to hear me. This will not be pretty. Your father will fight. Your sister will fight. They will say terrible things about you. Margaret, they've been saying terrible things about me for my entire life. At least now I get to answer back. She laughed, warm and genuine. Lucille always said you had steel underneath all that quiet. I'm beginning to see what she meant. May 13th. Colleen called at 4:45. What did you do? Her voice was tight with barely controlled fury. I don't know what you're talking about. Dad just got a notice from the board secretary. Emergency session tomorrow. Requested by Margaret Linden. She hasn't filed anything in 15 years, Vivian. What did you do? Maybe she has concerns about company management. Don't play games with me. If you're trying to embarrass this family because you're upset about the dinner, I'm doing my job, Colleen. Same as always. She hung up without another word. 20 minutes later Frank stormed past my desk without a glance and slammed his office door hard enough to rattle the walls. Through the drywall I heard him on the phone, it's a waste of time. Margaret's probably losing it. Vivian? She can barely keep the printer running. She's not a threat to anyone. I sat in my little cubicle, listening to my father laugh at me through a wall, and for the first time in 42 years I smiled. Being underestimated, being dismissed, being treated like I wasn't worth a second thought, that wasn't a wound anymore. It was an advantage. And I was about to use every last bit of it. That night I prepared 3 copies of the will. The 2018 board minutes downloaded onto my phone. A statement of facts, no accusations. David Calloway confirmed he'd attend. Margaret texted at 11, petition filed. Your grandmother would be proud. I barely slept. But it wasn't pain keeping me awake this time. It was something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. May 14th. Thornton Tower, 38th floor. I stepped off the elevator in a borrowed gray blazer 2 sizes too big, carrying a leather portfolio I'd bought at Goodwill for $15. The security guard stopped me. Name? Vivian Thornton. He checked his tablet. Frowned. You're not on the authorized list. I'm a Thornton Capital employee and I have business before the board. Colleen appeared behind me. Navy suit, silk scarf, designer heels. The uniform of someone who belonged. Vivian? What are you doing here? I have information for the board. Information? About what? You work at the front desk. Before she could say more, Frank appeared at the end of the hallway flanked by two executives. What's going on? Vivian wants into the board meeting, Colleen said, already dismissing me with a wave of her hand. Frank looked at me the way he always did, like something stuck to the bottom of his shoe. Go back to your desk. This doesn't concern you. Actually, a voice called from inside the boardroom, it does. Margaret Linden appeared in the doorway. 74 years old, silver-haired, standing with the quiet authority of a woman who'd been closing deals when my father was still in diapers. I invited her. She is standing to address this board. Let her in, Frank. His jaw clenched. But Margaret had been on that board for 34 years. Her authority in that room outranked his. Fine, he said, cold as January. Let her talk. We'll see how long it takes before she embarrasses herself. 12 board members seated around an oval walnut table. Portraits on the walls. And above the fireplace, Grandma Lucille, her painted eyes watching from the frame. Robert Chen, the board chairman, called the meeting to order and gave Margaret the floor. She yielded her time to me. I stood. My hands were steady. What I'm about to present may come as a surprise. I ask only that you hear the evidence before reaching conclusions. My father raised his hand. Robert, before we waste everyone's valuable time. Vivian is my daughter and I love her, but she is not qualified to address this board on any matter. She has no legal training, no financial background, no strategic experience. Colleen chimed in with practiced sympathy that was worse than open cruelty. Vivian also has a chronic health condition. She struggles with basic tasks. We've tried to support her, but some limitations are just that. Frank continued, what you're seeing is a frustrated woman acting out because of sibling jealousy. Robert Chen's voice cut through the room. Mr. Thornton, you'll have your chance. Miss Thornton has the floor. Frank sat down. Colleen mouthed, you're embarrassing yourself. I looked at them both. And something shifted inside me. Not anger. Something colder and clearer. They weren't protecting me. They weren't protecting the company. They were protecting the story. The one where I was nothing. I won't be discussing my health today, I said. I'll be discussing this. I held up the will. The room went dead silent. This is the last will and testament of Lucille Margaret Thornton, founder of this company. Notarized September 2019. Frank's face drained white. That's impossible. Her will was from 2015. You have her previous will. Under Pennsylvania law, a subsequent valid will revokes all prior testamentary documents. This one was executed 4 years later. David Calloway stood. I can confirm. I served as Lucille Thornton's personal attorney. This will was executed in my presence, witnessed by 2 independent notaries. The original is held in escrow at First Republic Trust. Robert Chen studied the document. This bequeaths 51% of Thornton Capital shares to you. Murmurs erupted. It's a forgery, Colleen said, but her voice had cracked. It's not, David replied flatly. I'd advise against accusations of fraud without evidence. Frank slammed his fist on the table. My mother was sick. She was being manipulated. Manipulated? I pulled out my phone and pressed play. His own voice filled the room. Lucille is 81 years old. She doesn't understand modern business. I'm proposing we reduce her voting rights to 10%. The recording ended. Silence. Complete silence. Robert Chen said, Miss Thornton, please read the relevant passage for the record. I took a breath. To my granddaughter, Vivian Marie Thornton, I bequeath 51% of my shares in Thornton Capital Holdings, along with all voting rights. I let it land. This bequest is made with full knowledge of my son Frank's treatment of Vivian. She has been excluded, diminished, and denied opportunity, not due to lack of ability, but due to lack of support. Vivian is not lazy. Vivian was abandoned. I looked directly at my father. She wrote, "I built this company from nothing. I choose who carries it forward. I choose Vivian." The will was confirmed legally binding. The 2015 version was superseded. And for the first time in my entire life, my father looked at me with fear. Colleen said, "Even if this is valid, she can't run a company." "I'm not proposing to run it," I said. "I'm proposing a vote of confidence. The board decides whether Frank Thornton retains their confidence as CEO. If the majority says yes, I won't interfere. If they say no, he resigns." "This is a revenge fantasy," Colleen snapped. "No. This is corporate governance. The same process Grandma Lucille wrote into the bylaws 40 years ago. If Dad has the board's confidence, he has nothing to worry about." Margaret seconded the motion without hesitation. The vote, 4 hands for confidence. 7 against. 1 abstention. Robert Chen set down his pen. The motion carries. "Mr. Thornton, you have 30 days to tender your resignation." Frank stood. Looked at me. Really looked at me, maybe for the first time in his life. I didn't see rage. I saw recognition. The slow, sickening understanding that he had underestimated me so completely, so thoroughly, for so many years, that he had handed me every tool I needed to take it all away. He walked out of that room without a single word. And the door closed behind him with a sound that felt a whole lot like justice. He caught me in the hallway outside. Diane was with him, mascara streaked down her cheeks. "You ungrateful, scheming, Frank. Not here. She just destroyed this family in front of 12 people." I stood my ground. I didn't destroy anything. I told the truth. Your grandmother was confused, that lawyer manipulated. Grandma Lucille wrote that will 5 months after you tried to strip her of power. You didn't lose because I betrayed you, Dad. You lost because you betrayed her. Diane stepped forward. "Vivian, sweetheart, we were trying to protect you. You've always struggled. You didn't protect me. You erased me." 42 years of silence crystallized into words I'd been choking on since I was a kid. Every Christmas dinner, every family event, every single conversation where you talked about Colleen like she was your only child and I was just furniture in the room. You let that happen. Both of you. That wasn't protection, Mom. That was abandonment, and you know it. Frank grabbed my arm. "We'll contest the will." I pulled free. "You'll lose. Grandma Lucille planned for every move you try. Including this one." I walked to the elevator. Behind me, my mother's voice, "Vivian, wait." I didn't wait. For the first time in 42 years, I didn't need their permission to leave. The doors closed on their faces. I leaned against the steel wall and let myself breathe. What came wasn't triumph. It was grief. I had just killed 20 years of hoping things would change, of believing that if I was patient enough and quiet enough and good enough, they'd eventually see me. That hope was dead now. I'd killed it myself, and it needed to die, but that didn't mean it didn't hurt. May 19th. Frank signed his resignation. Robert Chen became interim CEO and offered me a formal role, strategic advisor, $185,000 a year plus share dividends. I proposed a new division, sustainable development, green building and environmental impact work. The kind of forward-thinking Lucille would have championed. The story went public a week later. Philadelphia Business Journal, Thornton Capital shakeup, founder's granddaughter takes control after secret will surfaces. 3 investment partners requested meetings with me directly. One told me, "We've had concerns about Frank's leadership for years. Your grandmother built something special. It's good to see her vision protected." June. My mother called. We met at a coffee shop in Center City. She looked 10 years older. I want to apologize. For everything. Are you sorry, or just scared because everything changed? She flinched. Both. I'm ashamed to say it, but both. She wiped her eyes. I told myself I was protecting you from expectations you couldn't meet. That was a lie so I wouldn't have to feel guilty. You let Dad call me worthless at holiday dinners. In front of everyone. You never said one word. I know. And I can never undo that. But I don't want to lose you entirely. I looked at this woman who'd braided my hair as a child and forgotten my birthday as an adult. I can't pretend the last 20 years didn't happen, I said. But I'm willing to try building something honest. It wasn't forgiveness. It was a start. August. Colleen called. I've been in therapy since May. 3 times a week. Good. It's brutal. Being the golden child isn't a gift, Vivian. It's a different kind of cage. Dad expected perfection every single day, and I gave it because the alternative was becoming you. She caught herself. That came out wrong. No. It came out honest. I should have defended you. I didn't because I was afraid of losing my place. I know. That's not an excuse. No. But it's real. We sat by the Schuylkill River and watched joggers pass. 2 sisters who'd spent their whole lives in the same house as strangers. I can't go back to how things were, I said. But I'm not interested in being enemies. Her eyes filled with tears. I'd like to try. November, 2024. I moved into my own apartment in Fairmount. 1 bedroom, tall windows, a view of the Philadelphia skyline my grandmother had helped shape. On the wall, I hung her portrait, the same one that had watched over the boardroom for decades. Some evenings, when the light came through the windows just right, I could swear she was smiling. You did it, Grandma. You gave me the tools. I just had to be brave enough to use them. Looking back now, I understand something I couldn't have at 35 or even at 40. Grandma Lucille didn't leave me 51% of her company because I was better than Colleen. She left it because she knew I wouldn't let power turn me into my father. Fibromyalgia isn't my flaw. It's part of who I am, like my patience, my ability to see patterns, my refusal to quit even when my own body fights me every step of the way. The things that made me seem weak in my parents' eyes were the same things that let me see the truth when everyone else looked away. My father measured people by credentials and titles. My grandmother measured them by character, by kindness, by how they treated the ones who couldn't fight back. Now I get to measure my own worth. Not by what my parents said. Not by what my sister achieved. By my own standard. My own truth. If you're watching this and you see yourself in any part of my story, if you've ever been the overlooked one, the dismissed one, the one they said would never amount to anything, I want you to hear this. You don't need a secret inheritance to know your own value. You don't need anyone's permission to matter. But you do need to give yourself permission to stop chasing approval from people who will never give it. My family hurt me for 42 years. But I didn't need to hurt them back to find peace. I just had to stop waiting for them to see me and start seeing myself. That's the real inheritance my grandmother left me. And nobody can ever take it away. Now, like I said earlier, this is what we do on this channel. I take real stories from Reddit, Quora, and other forums, stories that real people have actually lived through. I change the names and details, add a bit of fiction to protect privacy, and then break down the psychology behind it so we can all learn together. Because these stories aren't just entertainment. They're lessons. The more we understand how manipulation works, the harder it becomes for anyone to use it against us. If this story meant something to you, I'd love to hear about it. Drop a comment, tell me your story, or just let me know you were here. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and if you want more stories like this one, there's a whole library waiting for you right here on this channel. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. I'll see you in the next one.